The version of you that will be is not in the future. It is in the field, complete, coherent, existing as a pattern of consciousness before it exists as a life experience. And what determines when and whether you will experience it is not the effort of building from the outside in. It is alignment from the inside up. The Kybalion, the Hermetic text that synthesizes the 7 fundamental principles of Hermetic philosophy, one of the oldest traditions for understanding the mind and reality, proposes something that quantum physics is only now describing with different language. The all is mind. The universe is mental, not as a poetic metaphor, as a statement about the nature of reality. The mental pattern precedes and organizes the physical pattern, and what exists as physical reality is the expression of what first existed as mental reality, or as a field of conscious possibility. Quantum physics describes the field of superposition, the state in which multiple possibilities coexist before any collapse into a defined physical reality, and describes the role of the observer in that collapse. The observer's state influences which of the available possibilities the field collapses into. The convergence of these two perspectives, the Hermetic and the quantum, points to the same conclusion. The future version of yourself that you want to experience already exists as a possibility in the field. What determines whether you will experience it or continue circling through the same possibilities you have always experienced is the state of consciousness from which you observe the field. You have gone through periods of searching for your future self, visualizations of who you want to be, affirmations about who you want to become, plans for the path toward what you want to achieve, and some of those periods produced genuine movement, but many produced a cycle of enthusiasm, followed by stagnation, where the distance between who you are and who you want to be seemed just as present as before any practice. That cycle is not the failure of the practices, it is the result of trying to reach the future self from the state of the present self, as if the future self were a destination to be built from the bottom up, rather than a pattern that already exists in the field and needs to be experienced from the inside out. You are not going to learn more visualization techniques here. You are going to understand the mechanism by which the Hermetic Principle of Correspondence, as above, so below, as within, so without, determines which possibilities in the field you have access to and how to align your inner state with the pattern of the future self that already exists in the field. This is the exact moment, the distinction between reaching the future self from the outside, building the path from the bottom up, and corresponding with the future self from within, aligning your inner state with the pattern that already exists in the field, is what separates cycles of searching from moments of genuine encounter. Leaving before the end would mean missing the map of correspondence that makes it possible to collapse the field into the version of yourself that already exists as a possibility, instead of continuing to observe the field from the state that collapses it into the same possibilities as always. Less than 1% of the people who work with the idea of the future self understand that the future self is not being built, it is being collapsed. It already exists. What is being developed is the state correspondence that allows the collapse to happen, and there is a paradox that will be fully revealed at the end. You are not trying to become the future self. You are trying to correspond with the future self that already is in the field, in the mental plane that, according to Hermeticism, precedes and organizes the physical plane. But before understanding how to create that correspondence, we need to look at what has always prevented you from doing so. The most common behavior among those who work with the concept of the future self is trying to build it, to act as the future self would act, think as the future self would think, accumulate the external characteristics that the future self would have. That approach has its logic. If you act like the person you want to become, eventually you will become that person, and there is a version of that logic that works. Habits and actions consistent with a new identity progressively install that identity. But this approach starts from a point that often remains untouched: the inner state of someone who is still reaching, still arriving, still not there yet. And that state of not yet, when it operates as the point of departure, collides with the future self instead of corresponding with it. The counterintuitive inversion, grounded in the Hermetic principle of correspondence, is this: the future self is not built from the outside in, it is collapsed from the inside out. The work is not to accumulate the external characteristics the future self would have. It is to align your inner state with the consciousness pattern of the future self, and then the external characteristics organize themselves around that state, rather than the state trying to organize itself around the external characteristics. The difference between building the future self from the outside in and corresponding with the future self from the inside out is total. The first starts from the state of someone who is not yet and is trying to get there. The second starts from the recognition that the pattern already exists in the field and creates the state of correspondence that allows the collapse. Quantum superposition describes a field of possibilities in which multiple versions of you coexist as potential patterns. The state of someone who is striving, who has not yet arrived, is the observer who collapses the field into the version of themselves that is seeking, instead of into the version that already exists as a higher level possibility. Think of a radio tuning into a station. The station does not need to be built by the radio. It already exists as a frequency in the electromagnetic field around it. What the radio does is tune in, adjust its internal frequency to correspond to the frequency of the station it wants to receive. The future self is the station. The inner state of correspondence is the tuning. But here is where most people stop listening, and it is exactly what changes everything: the mechanism by which the inner state of correspondence with the future self allows the collapse of the field into the version of you that already exists as a possibility, operates through the logic of the Hermetic principle of correspondence. As above, so below, as within, so without, which describes a law of mirroring between the planes of existence. The mental plane, above, within, determines what manifests on the physical plane, below, without, not as a force of will that compels reality to change, but as a law of correspondence that organizes what is possible to perceive and attract from any specific inner state. The mechanism has 3 levels. The first is the level of perception. When the inner state corresponds to the consciousness pattern of the future self, what you perceive as possible, relevant, or as an opportunity in the external field changes. Because perception is filtered by the inner state, and a different state opens the filter to different perceptions. The second is the level of action when the inner state corresponds to the pattern of the future self. The actions that emerge from that state have a different quality than the actions that come from the state of not yet. They are inspired actions rather than forced actions, not because the external situation has changed, but because the inner state from which the actions emerge has changed. The third is the level of the field. When the inner state has sufficient coherence with the pattern of the future self, the field around it begins to organize itself in a way that corresponds to that pattern through the mechanisms of selective perception, qualified action, and the synchronicities that Jung described as non-causal correspondences between inner states and external events. Coherence, the state in which the internal system operates in an integrated way with all elements pointing toward the same pattern, is what the Hermetic principle calls alignment and what quantum physics associates with an increased probability of collapse into specific states. Think of the water level that must reach a certain height before it can flow through a channel. Before reaching the height of correspondence, the water remains dammed. Once it reaches that height, it flows naturally, requiring no additional effort. The state of correspondence with the future self is the height, and what flows once it is reached is not built through effort. It is allowed through correspondence. Take a deep breath now. Inhale fully, exhale slowly, and now, instead of thinking about the future self you want to be, notice this. What is the quality of consciousness from which that future self operates? Not what it has or achieves, the way it exists internally. The quality of presence, clarity, and relationship with itself and the world. What you are touching right now is the pattern of correspondence. It is with this quality of state that alignment must happen. The practical consequence is straightforward. To collapse the field into the version of yourself that already exists as a possibility, do not accumulate the external characteristics of the future self. Access the inner state from which the future self operates, and access it not as a simulation of a future that has not yet arrived, but as correspondence with a pattern that already exists in the field. But there is an obstacle that prevents most people from maintaining this state of correspondence consistently enough for the collapse to happen, and it is built from the most honest materialism that exists. And when you truly understand this, you realize that there is an obstacle no one talks about. What blocks you is not what you think it is. The obstacle is not the difficulty of momentarily accessing the state of correspondence with the future self. It is that current external evidence, the circumstances of daily life that do not yet correspond to the pattern of the future self, continuously activates a return to the original point of departure state, dissolving the correspondence that was being cultivated. You access the state of correspondent. You feel the quality of presence of the future self. You perceive the difference between that state and your habitual state, and then everyday life happens. A financial situation that contradicts the future self's pattern of abundance. A relationship that contradicts the future self's pattern of presence. A limitation that contradicts the future self's pattern of possibility. And the nervous system, which uses external evidence as a reference for reality, reverts to the state corresponding to the evidence, not to the pattern that was being cultivated. The central paradox of Hermetic work with the future self is this: external evidence is a mirror of a previous inner state, not of the state that is being cultivated now. And using current external evidence as the criterion for validating the state being cultivated is using the past to judge the present that is creating the future. Your tendency to use current external evidence as a reference point for returning to your habitual state is not the enemy. It is the last guardian before the breakthrough, the validation system that learned that external reality is the most reliable confirmation available, applied to the one context in which the external reality that confirms the future self pattern is the result of the state, not its cause. The difference between a state of correspondence that waits for external evidence in order to sustain itself and a state of correspondence that sustains itself independently of external evidence that still reflects the old pattern is precisely the difference that the Hermetic principle of polarity describes as the position that controls the pattern that will manifest. What allows you to maintain the state of correspondence with the future self while external evidence still reflects the previous pattern? That loop will remain open, because the answer is not to ignore the evidence, it is to understand what it is. If you have made it this far, you are already in a greater state of correspondence than when you began. The pattern is already collapsing in this direction. So, how do you move past this final guardian? Here is what changes everything. The solution to the tendency to use current external evidence as the criterion for returning to the habitual state is a reorientation regarding what current external evidence is and what it is not. Current external evidence is the field collapsed by the previous inner state, by the state of consciousness that was operating before this work of correspondence began. It is not the current reality of who you are as a state of consciousness now. It is the echo of who you were as a state of consciousness before. This distinction, when genuinely received, dissolves the authority that external evidence had been exercising over the state of correspondence, because external evidence ceases to be the mirror of who you are and becomes the mirror of who you were, which is entirely different information. The practical instruction is this: every time external evidence contrasts with the pattern of the future self that is being cultivated, instead of using that contrast as evidence that the state of correspondence is an illusion, use it as information about the previous state and deliberately return to the state of correspondence. The inner phrase is, "This is the echo of the previous state. I operate from the state of correspondence now." This practice is not a denial of reality. It is an understanding that external reality always lags behind the inner state, and that the delay is smaller than it appears when external evidence is being used as the criterion for validating the present state. Before continuing, pause here. Think of a current external piece of evidence that contrasts with the pattern of the future self you want to be, and realize this is an echo of the previous state, not of the state of correspondence that is being cultivated now. The distance between the evidence and the pattern is not proof that the pattern does not exist. It is evidence of how different the states were that produced each one. What you are perceiving now is the field being reinterpreted. Current external evidence is not the criterion for validating the state of correspondence. It is the echo of the previous state. And when this distinction is genuinely received, the state of correspondence can be maintained while evidence still reflects the old pattern because the source of validation has shifted from external to internal. This creates the possibility of maintaining the state of correspondence with enough consistency for the field to begin collapsing in the direction of the pattern being cultivated. But there is a deeper layer that determines whether this consistency will produce a real collapse or whether it will remain a state accessed periodically without the density of presence necessary to influence the field. This layer is where the principle of correspondence meets the foundation of all traditions that have used alignment with a higher pattern as a technology of transformation. Comment now. The pattern already exists, not as an affirmation that the future self has already manifested externally, but as a recognition that the pattern already exists in the field as a real possibility, and that the state of correspondence being cultivated now is what allows it to be collapsed. And this deeper layer, it is where everything you have learned either becomes permanent or disappears within days. You are not inventing the idea that the pattern of the future self exists in the field before it exists in physical experience, and that alignment with this pattern is the mechanism of manifestation. You are arriving through your own experience of moments in which something of the future version emerged without conscious effort of construction, at the same recognition reached by the traditions and thinkers who most rigorously mapped the principle of correspondence between inner state and outer field. The Kybalion, published in 1908 and attributed to 3 initiates, a synthesis of Hermetic teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, states the second Hermetic principle with a clarity that no later reformulation has surpassed. As above, so below. As below, so above. As within, so without. As without, so within. As the great, so the small. Correspondence is not merely a contemplative metaphor. It is the mechanism by which, according to the Hermetic tradition, the state of consciousness organizes what manifests in the field of experience. The Kabbalistic tradition, especially in the concepts of Tzimtzum, contraction, and Or, light potential, proposes that the potential for all creation exists in the field of possibility before it is manifested, and that the work of the human being is to create the correspondence, kelim, vessels, that allows potential to descend from the field of possibility into lived experience. Creation is not produced from nothing. It is collapsed from the field of potential into experience through the alignment that creates the proper vessels. The physicist David Bohm, whose theory of the implicate order proposes that there is a more fundamental level of reality, the implicate order, from which perceptible physical reality, the explicate order, emerges, arrived through theoretical physics at a conclusion that resonates with the Hermetic principle. What manifests in the explicate order is determined by what is enfolded in the implicate order, and consciousness plays a role in the unfolding of possibilities from the implicate order into the explicate order. And the philosopher William James, a pioneer of American pragmatism and the psychology of religion, documented that expanded states of consciousness possess what he called an excess of meaning, a quality of certainty about something that is not yet external evidence, but that the inner state recognizes as real. James proposed that these states are not illusions. They are contact with a level of reality broader than ordinary perception can reach. The Kybalion and the Hermetic Principle of Correspondence, Kabbalah, and the vessels that allow potential to collapse into experience, David Bohm, and the implicate order that precedes and organizes the explicate order, William James, and the excess of meaning found in expanded states of consciousness, all describing the same structure. There is a level of reality where the pattern of the future self already exists as a possibility before it exists as physical experience. And what determines whether it is experienced is the state of correspondence created by the observer. The unifying statement is this: the future self you are seeking does not need to be built. It needs to be corresponded with through the deliberate creation of the inner state that matches the pattern already present in the field, and through maintaining that state with enough consistency for the field to collapse in that direction, rather than remain collapsed into previous patterns, bringing this directly to you. Every moment in which you felt that something of your future version was present, even though external circumstances had not changed to justify it, was not necessarily an illusion of imagination. It was an experience of temporarily inhabiting a different state of consciousness, one that felt aligned with a desired future pattern. The difference between a state of correspondence that waits for external evidence to sustain itself and a state of correspondence that sustains itself while creating the conditions for future evidence is the difference between a boat waiting for the wind before raising its sails and a boat that raises its sails in preparation for the wind it intends to catch, like a seed that carries within itself the pattern of a tree, not as a promise of what it will become, but as a pattern already present in potential form, which manifests naturally when soil and conditions correspond. The future self exists first as potential. The work is to create the conditions that allow that potential to emerge. And when you embody this, not merely as an idea, but as an orientation toward life, something changes. You are no longer someone trying to construct a future identity from the outside in, collecting traits and external proofs that might eventually validate the identity you desire. You become someone who recognizes that meaningful change begins internally, and that actions, habits, perception, and relationships gradually organize around the state that is consistently cultivated. You are already in correspondence with your future self whenever you stop treating current circumstances as the final verdict on who you are capable of becoming, and instead treat them as information, useful, real, but not definitive. You do not become the future self only when circumstances finally match the vision, nor do you arrive there solely through external accumulation. The pattern begins as possibility. Experience follows through repeated alignment of thought, perception, emotion, and action. We are the ones who choose correspondence over waiting, who recognize the influence of past conditioning without allowing it to dictate every future outcome, who understand that as within, so without, is not a guarantee that thoughts magically create reality, but a reminder that the way we perceive, interpret, and engage with reality profoundly shapes what becomes possible. You who have come this far are no longer merely trying to reach the future self step by step. You have encountered an idea that shifts the direction of the journey, that who you are becoming is influenced not only by what you do, but by the state from which you do it. The synthesis is paradoxical. As many powerful insights are, you are not only becoming the future self, you are also learning to recognize and embody qualities that already exist within you in potential form. What is being developed is not the destination itself, it is the alignment that allows the destination to become lived experience, correspondence, not as a claim that correspondence is complete, but as recognition that growth begins when inner alignment and outer action start moving in the same direction. One important note: concepts such as field collapse, quantum manifestation, and the idea that consciousness literally selects future realities are philosophical or spiritual interpretations, not established conclusions of modern quantum physics. The psychological value of this framework often comes from its practical effect, clarifying intentions, strengthening commitment, changing perception, and encouraging consistent action, rather than from a scientifically demonstrated mechanism. The pattern may exist as possibility. The correspondence is the work, and the work is renewed each time you choose a state that is consistent with the life you intend to create.